Well, welcome to the seventh episode of Red Matrix. Really busy show again today. The one thing I think you will be attracted to is we talk about AI, and frankly, it's something I got completely wrong. Bird has managed to surprise me, first time in a long time. So really looking forward to getting into it.
You're going to love it. So Zelensky and his head of armed forces are at odds. The relationship, Sean, seems to have broken down. One guy seems to want to carry on. The other guy seems to be saying he wants to stop. Is this irretrievable? Is there going to be a winner in this debate or argument?
It's a really difficult one, I think. So the head of the armed forces, Valery Zelensky, is a very well-respected general. But of course, he is seeing firsthand the impact of this war. He's having to lead, motivate his people, watching huge casualties. President Zelensky, however, is there as a point of principle, wants to fight to the bitter end, wants to liberate his country. Now, whilst those are synonymous, those aims initially, now it appears that after the 6 months, we're now into the spring offensive, hasn't moved the dial at all in terms of territory. And Valery Zelensky's come out publicly and said, this looks like a bit of a stalemate at the moment. What's required to break that stalemate? And although friction between the political leaders and military leaders is not unusual, you have to look at it and say, this is really difficult. Now, President Zelensky would normally sack Zelensky and bring somebody else in. The problem is he probably knows that he's quite a good general, and therefore getting rid of him might actually not be helpful because you just get a me man. But this doesn't bode well for the prospects for Ukraine, for the fighting to come.
So is this going to be a battle of egos where one of the two has to, stand down? Or are they going to sit around a table and reality will set in? So in reality, Crimea is not going to change hands. The Donbass, maybe it's a negotiating chip somewhere. But actually the money is going to run out, is it? Because America seems to be saying this is getting to the point where maybe politically it's going to be really difficult for us. So what's going to happen?
I think probably D, all of the above. There is a growing recognition. And let's face it, Ukraine was given everything it needed to make that spring offensive work. And the lines haven't really moved at all. Russia is now better prepared to what gets thrown at it, is getting its defense industrial base sorted out. And as you say, all of the supporting factors for Ukraine, the West is running out of the supplies of weapons. America's political support is starting to wane. And let's look at it bluntly. At the start of this, the West and Ukraine's aims were aligned. They weren't the same, but they were aligned. The West was paranoid about Russia, potentially a threat to Europe, and therefore stopping it at Ukraine's shores was the answer. Today, Ukraine's aims haven't changed. They still want to liberate the whole country. But of course, from the West perspective, Russia is no longer the threat to Europe that it was at the start of this conflict. Yes, in 10 years' time, it may grow again. But at the moment, with so many other things dominating political agendas, the writing does appear to be on the wall for Ukraine. Now, nobody publicly is going to turn around and say, we're not going to support Ukraine anymore. But inevitably, I think it's going to have to be up to Zelensky. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if Valery Zelensky is starting to apply pressure internally as well as the external pressure to say, however much you don't want to compromise, it may be realpolitik that you have to find a way of drawing this to an end and focus on the challenges for the future. How are you going to pay for the country to be rebuilt? And what are the security guarantees that you're going to need to make sure this doesn't repeat itself?
So Ukraine doesn't have an air force, doesn't now have a navy, and yet it's managing to create havoc with the air force of Russia. So what's the reality? Are they just an irritant, like a sort of fly buzzing around, or actually are they making a big dent in Putin's attempts to dominate the air?
I think it's fascinating from a military perspective because, as we've discussed before, the Ukrainians don't really have a navy at all, and yet they managed to push the Russian navy further east. Now, although Ukraine's got a few faster aircraft, it's a minnow compared to the Russian Air Force. And under conventional Western doctrine, there will be control of the air and domination, and therefore make life really difficult. That is not the case at the front line at the moment. And there's been widespread reports, because the Ukrainians have got some good air defences right on the front line, and that the Russian attack helicopters, it's called the Ka-52 helicopter, they've lost so many of them now that they're actually deploying them further back away from the front line, so they're no longer effective. And what the Russian Air Force is having to do is use glide bombs, which glide about 50 kilometres to their targets, so they can sit so far back that they're out of the range of the weapons, the surface-to-air missile systems. Well, so what's wrong with that? Well, actually, these glide bombs aren't as accurate, and the Russians are using about 100 of these every day. They take quite a while to fly. When they're in flight, obviously they can't be aimed, so that the Ukrainians can move around on the battlefield. So the Russian Air Force is proving to be neutered, despite the fact that this is all done largely by ground defences. And the attack helicopters, which were really making a mess of Ukrainian frontline forces, are now having to back off. It's a real victory for the small guy.
You couldn't make it up, could you?
No. And what's going to happen in our defence budgets now when people are saying, why do you need a Navy? Why do you need an Air Force? Part of it's how you use it. But Russia's lost about 10% of its Air Force. But my goodness, it's not having the decisive effect it should have.
So excuse my ignorance, these glide bombs, they weren't like the things Germany used in the Second World War, were they?
Doodlebugs.
Doodlebugs. That's it.
So you're thinking about doodlebugs. They were literally pointing in a direction. They ran out of fuel, fell down and attacked.
Kind of similar though.
Well, yeah, the glide things are they by all account are guidable, so they can be GPS guided, but they have to go quite slowly because they'll be launched quickly. But if they're going to fly 50 kilometers, they've got to be launched from very high, and they've got to glide pretty slowly, so they don't have anything like the effect that you would want to have from a bomb. Generally, you want to have lots of kinetic energy as the bomb goes in, and then you create a massive impact. So it's not. It's just interesting to see how conventional wisdom has been turned on its head by the Ukrainians. Bern, last week we talked a lot about the role of the media. They want to be timely. They've got lots of data out there, but both sides are trying to wage an information war against each other. So how do we know what to believe?
So you'll see on the screen a picture of John Kaczynski. He's an Israeli. He was beaten up in his own town for criticising the Israeli effort in Gaza, and particularly the bombing. And he's, in the picture you can see him just recovering. The second image that we see now is a large block of flats in Gaza. It was hit by an Israeli missile, and you can see the brave emergency workers working both on the ground and also in the building, trying to rescue people, put fires out. And there's even tenants there already unable to get out and escape from the building. The problem with both these pictures is they were both created by me using artificial intelligence.
And this, for me, this was quite disturbing, because before we came on and started recording, you told me about this, and I genuinely didn't believe you, and I apologise unreservedly for that. But certainly the picture of the block of flats looks very believable, and the fact is that neither of us are technical wizards here. So the very fact you can produce something like this, there are people who are a lot more competent than you and I at doing this. That is a real worry. How on earth do we know what to believe then?
Well, it took me about 60 seconds of specification to the artificial intelligence tool for it then to go off and draw me these two images. And it got it wrong a couple of times. I went back and we did it again. As you say, I'm no expert in terms of implementation. You put this in the hands of an expert and you get things which are both, fake and disturbing, but also will polarize opinion one way or the other. And that's the aim. So now we know that. And in a way, I wish we didn't know it. But now we know it. When you look at an image, your first question is going to be, is it real? Is it rehearsed? Is it fake? Has it been created by artificial intelligence? Therefore, can I believe it? Actually, is there anything I can believe?
I guess part of it, when I look closely at this, and you and I, Banter, there's quite a lot of emergency services in there. So you sort of go, that's a bit odd, and also they're all wearing orange, which when you look actually out in Gaza, most people are just people not wearing orange. I guess part of the answer lies in the fact, because everybody has a mobile phone these days, so you'd cross-reference, isn't it? So you'd go, have you seen another picture of this same scene from a different angle, from a different camera with a different lighting, which has moved on a bit? Maybe that's it. It is about corroboration. It's about checking other sources and not only relying on an individual source.
I mean, the psychologist in me says this: the moment you see this, you erupt with an emotion, one way or the other, and that's the end of it for you. You're now going to argue the point. You're not going to very calmly go off and do what you as a military analyst will do and say, I need to see this 3 or 4 times. I'm going to look at it with my, microscope or something and find out whether I believe it. That's gone. You've exploded in here, and now you want to get somebody. And that's the purpose of this sort of imagery.
And what's really worrying, it wasn't, so the Al Ali hospital, when that, the explosion went off there, and immediately Hamas blamed Israel for it. Exactly as you say, everybody just believed that was true. And after, when it was proven it almost certainly wasn't true, nobody wanted to believe that because they've already made their own mind up.
It's too late, that's right. Yeah.
So it's an incredibly powerful tool, and this is evidence.
It's a weapon.
Yeah, of how simple it is to do.
Yeah. Sean, we talked about the tunnels. In my ignorance, I imagined lots of men with shovels and JCBs digging holes in the ground. I then thought about the Great Escape and people going down with bits of wood, blocking it out so it didn't collapse. And that's what I imagine. I gather, actually, that's completely wrong, obviously, and it's much, much more sophisticated.
It is a lot more sophisticated. I mean, first of all, we've seen pictures. There's actually full rooms, briefing rooms, breakfast rooms, meal rooms, the lot underground. Secondly, it's more expansive than the London Underground is. That gives you an idea of the scale of the tunnels underneath Gaza. And why it's become topical at the moment is that we've heard literally in the last couple of days, the Israelis are apparently going to have a go at flooding them all with seawater, which at face value sounds quite a clever idea. The trouble is there's several different problems with that, one of which is these tunnels are not at the same level. Some of them go up and down. So, of course, water will always
By design.
Yeah, and they'll always go to the lowest level. Secondly, the ground is largely sandy, so that it probably will gradually seep down through. So you've got to put a lot of water in and very quickly to get it through there. Thirdly, of course, it will actually damage the aquifer. So the fresh water, the limited fresh water that Gaza gets comes from an aquifer, and that's going to destroy that. And of course, finally, it isn't just Hamas down there.
Hostages.
The hostages are also potentially down there. So the danger is you actually end up killing the hostages. Now, what's I found fascinating about the tunnel network, which I didn't know beforehand, was that the Jews have used tunnel networks even against Romans. So 2,000 years ago, this is not a new concept. But Hamas, 16 years ago, when they took control of Gaza, have taken the whole thing to an absolutely new level, with the level of complexity. Now, the IDF in the north of the country have discovered 800 access points. 500 of those they've either blown up or they've sealed. So they haven't actually gone in because they just reckon they'll be booby-trapped and whatever. But they've got to locate these tunnels. Then how do you actually collapse them? Getting bombs to go through worked several years ago. So all Hamas did was dig them a bit lower and put concrete reinforcements in them so that they don't fall down. That's proven very effective. You can put a coloured smoke in so you can see where the smoke comes out. It's called purple hair, apparently, and that's a way of finding it. You can pour liquid explosive down, set it off, and blow the tunnels up that way and destroy them. But actually, it's a really difficult nut to crack, and especially when they're so extensive. Although the rumours are they're going to have a go at flooding them, I'm not sure that's going to work. And if they do end up killing lots of hostages that way, I'm not sure that will bear close scrutiny when the war is over.
Initially, Israeli objectives were destroy Hamas, get their people back. We've just learnt that the Israelis have walked away from the negotiating table. What are they up to?
Qataris have been very good at negotiating between both sides. Actually, there's mediation, and the US CIA and Mossad, which is Israel's sort of intelligence organization, have been involved in Qatar negotiating. But Prime Minister Netanyahu's pulled all his people out. Now, what's interesting about this is that the first stage of the Israeli attack onto Hamas hasn't liberated any hostages. The only thing that has is the negotiations. Now, Israel would argue that it had to force Hamas to those negotiations, but why would you walk away? What appears to be the case is that whilst you're absolutely right, there's two objectives for Israel. One of them has to be the priority. And what's evident is if you're negotiating for hostage release, you have to have some sort of truce, you have to have a pause. And the longer those pauses happen, the more the international community raises the spectre of all this humanitarian situation. It becomes more and more difficult for Israel to start up again. And what seems to be pretty evident now is that Israel is absolutely focused on the destruction of Hamas over and above the hostage situation. It'll come back to that in the fullness of time once it's achieved its destruction of Hamas. The challenge, of course, is for the international community. America's got 10 foreign nationals that are still, American nationals that are still unaccounted for. There are apparently a dozen Brits that were killed on that fateful day on the 7th of October, but 5 still unaccounted for. So the international community is going to be very concerned at this apparent focus on Hamas rather than hostages.